me open my chat.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the June 2025 SJAA imaging meeting. And tonight we have Mason Hall from Chabot, who's going to talk to us about Chabot and stuff like that. Take it away, Mason.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate the opportunity. Yeah, welcome. Hello. Thanks again for having me. Um, I'm going to talk a little bit about what's going on at Chabot and actually give you guys a little bit of a pitch on towards the very end. I'll start by just talking a little bit about myself, give you a brief history on Chabot, and then we're going to talk about exhibit development and exhibit development process. And this will help. And through that talk, I'll talk a little bit about the Universe Unveiled exhibition that a few of the members of your club were a part of. And yeah, so I'm the only exhibit developer at Chabot. I've been there a couple years now, just a little over 2 years. And I'm gonna let's see if I can jump through my slides here. Zoom. All right, everybody see the next slide? It's kind of changed the navigation here. So a little bit about myself. This is my family, very creative family. My background is actually in fine arts and filmmaking and sculpture. Um, we're a family of artists. My son's a musician and composer. My daughter's a writer and musician, and my wife is a designer. Um, like I said, my background is in fine arts. Went to an actual art school for filmmaking and sculpture. Soon after that, I jumped into the film industry as well as working in the museum world. So I've worked in the museum world since my 20s, so a very long time. You can guess at how old I am. Yeah, this is me in my 20s working for Solowit. Worked for hundreds of different artists, dozens of museums, full time in a few museums in Chicago where I went to school. Moved out to Los Angeles, worked at museums there and in the film industry. Went to moved to Los Angeles primarily to work to go to UCLA for grad school, but ended up working for the professor I hoped to study under, and was at the Gene Autry Museum there. Moved back to Minneapolis with my wife. We had a couple kids and came out to the Bay Area to work at the Exploratorium. I was at the Exploratorium for almost 12 years before I started at Chabot. At the same time, I had my own art practice. It's a little bit unique. Like I said, I do film and sculpture, but this other aspect of my art practice is actually working with community groups and individual artists. So throughout the years, I've run a couple different nonprofits, most recently the Narrative Arts Center here in the East Bay, where we ran film and art education programming for kids and adults. I also make films on the side. So currently I'm making a documentary film called Become the Mountain. Um, I am also, I like to consider myself an avid astrophotographer. I would say that I'm nowhere near the quality of the astrophotographers that we had in the most recent exhibit here, but I like getting out into the dark, out into remote locations using my DSLR or mirrorless cameras. I did start teaching astrophotography at a community center nearby, and that kind of helped me land this job at Chabot, coming from the Exploratorium. Through this quote in here, this is kind of gives you a picture of how my different skill sets kind of made me a perfect match at Chabot, where as an astrophotographer and an artist, I was also deeply interested in the sciences. And yeah, that kind of once I got hired here, I got hired for a couple different reasons, which I'll get into in a few minutes. But that background gives you a little bit of understanding of where I'm coming from. So just to briefly talk about Chabot, there's a long history. I'm not sure how many folks here have been to Chabot or know that much about Chabot, but they are a public observatory, so primarily used for educational purposes, and that's how they got started. 1883, Chabot donated their first telescope, and it was right downtown in Oakland until the light bulb basically came about and they moved up into the Oakland Hills. They were in the Oakland Hills for quite a while. I believe that was in 1915 they moved there, acquired their second telescope when they moved there. Soon after that, well, actually about 20, 30 years after that, they realized they had some major seismic issues they need to be fixed. And instead of fixing that site, they decided to raise funds for the newest site, which opened in 2000, which you can see here up at Skyline Boulevard. So primarily housing three historic telescopes. One was designed and built. I'll get to that in a second. But you can see we've got a full planetarium, a theater, lots of different exhibit halls and classrooms, a nice big facility. And the expectation were a lot of visitors were going to come pouring in at this place. So yeah, here's the three different historic telescopes. Leia is an 8-inch refractor on the left. Rachel is a 20-inch from 1915. And then the third, Nellie, was designed by EAS and built for the opening, which is now I consider it a historic telescope as it needs full retrofitting of its operating system and which requires some new hardware. The exhibits that were being made right after they opened were really designed around bringing in huge, large crowds. This is one that was really popular. I'm just going to play you a quick clip of this. Can everybody see this okay?
Hi, Bill Nye here. Join me at the Climate Lab at Chabot Space and Science Center where it all comes down to Earth. Let's go. Everything in the exhibit is geared to showing you the size of the problem of climate change big, showing you a lot about energy use, a lot about energy use in transportation. A huge opportunity, huge opportunity. Somebody to get rich. I want one of these kids to get rich. I do. Because at my age, of course, I'm full of ideas. Oh, yes, don't get me wrong.
Well, I think that everyone should do as much as possible to help the planet, like in saving energy.
So I just want to draw attention to the exhibitry here. That's where my background's at. And this probably looks like typical exhibitry that you would see. I would consider this high-end exhibitry. This is a very large budget. Their advertising campaign included a celebrity. So really a fantastic exhibit.
Young inventors, young innovators to change the world. That's why you should come to Chabot Space and Science Center and see the Climate Lab exhibit.
So fantastic exhibit. I think it did pretty well, but shortly after that, the center basically just could not operate in a fiduciary way. They were completely broke, and it was partly due because of these large scale exhibits that are really designed for a large scale institution. Like many of the, now we're going to fast forward to the pandemic era, which like many institutions, they had to close. And Chabot had been really struggling financially throughout the years. And coming out of the pandemic, the newer director, Adam Tobin, worked really tirelessly to build these different partnerships. And the big ones that arose out of the reopening in after the pandemic was with NASA Ames, as well as the Betty Moore and Gordon Foundation. So Chabot is now a NASA Ames Visitor Center, and I'd like to talk a little bit about that and really talk about how Adam's taking a different approach to exhibitry. He came from the Exploratorium along with myself, and realizing that although the facility is a large facility, we are very much a mid-sized museum, and along with that comes many challenges, but also opportunities. So this was the first time Chabot had decided to have its own in-house exhibit team, meaning that we designed, built, and developed every aspect of the exhibit itself. The idea is that this is, I'm going to jump to this. So we'll talk a little bit about the NASA Ames Visitor Center. This is the primary project that I was hired to help get going. We had a very short timeline, about 1.5 years. I came in about a year up to the opening date. We had a very small operating budget, about $100,000 to get this entire project off the ground. At the same time, we were building our partnership from scratch with NASA Ames. So a lot to work out in a very short amount of time. The typical exhibit development process is around 3 to 5 years when you're starting off with a partnership and a much higher budget, like you saw with the Bill Nye exhibit. So we really looked at the traditional exhibit process, which is, you typically start with this planning and concept design. You move to your review stages, your development stages, and then you're working in towards that final fabrication and exhibit opening. So this is a back and forth primarily between the institution and outsourcing this whole process to a company, which they had primarily done since its opening in 2000, and it just they weren't able to stay afloat. So this traditional model of exhibit building can cost anywhere between $250,000 to $1 million per exhibit. It's up for maybe a year, maybe 2 years at the very most, and then if it doesn't travel, it just goes straight into the garbage. So not really the most sustainable model. The other aspects of this kind of design, this traditional design process, really puts the institution as what we call the castle on the hill. So where we are providing the structure of knowledge, and the visitors come and partake in that knowledge. And we're really coming from the Exploratorium, we're really trying to flip that on its head and really develop an immersive experience for somebody to come and be a part of the learning and create that learning process at the same time. So we really looked at like different models to and redeveloped our own system from scratch. We knew we wanted to introduce a new narrative into the center. So that means using story, putting objects in context. So, and we knew we wanted to develop a sustainable model for the size of the institution, not only financially sustainable, but also sustainable for the staff itself. So how rapidly can we do these changeovers from scratch with a small in-house design team and not burn everybody out? So that's a big thing, because capacity, our exhibit design team is 5 people, and there's a lot to do with just 5 people. Of course, we do ramp up when you get to fabrication, and then the last part was really about this idea of like, the visitor comes into the immersive learning experience, and they are partaking in that journey. So they are sometimes developing the exhibit as they are there at the museum. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. So this model itself, what we looked at was, well, how can we make this sort of a modular system? And what we did was we took the different sections of NASA Ames and categorized them, knew that would be kind of fixed in the gallery space. And then we created what we called bubbles within there. And this allowed us to sort of simplify what projects and people and activities we were going to develop. And that allowed us, if they were produced and fabricated in a certain way, you could swap them out really easily without having to go back in and redevelop the entire space from scratch. So I'm not sure if everybody can see my pointer here, but this top graphic shows how you would have this work. You enter into the introduction area, and you'd have these various bubbles of how, what you're talking about in that area. And then you would move into the second area, and that within that flight zone, you would have one project that NASA Ames is working on. you would have certain scientists or certain people highlighted in there, and then you would also have certain problem-solving activities for visitors to get their hands on and explore and learn in new and different immersive ways. My job as an exhibit developer is really to sort of visualize everything from the beginning, as well as design the systems that are going to be at play, and then all the way down to how things are going to be built. So we really looked at how could we make the most cost-efficient modular system. So all these walls are reusable, they come apart. A lot of the artifacts can be easily moved and shifted. The graphics can be easily reprinted and shifted around as we decide to update various systems. So what you're looking at is my concept drawings and then the finished actual exhibit. So, and here's an example of how these bubbles work, where we had these three main fixed sections that describe the different parts of NASA Ames. So one being exploring other worlds, one being flight, and one being tech tools. And within each category, we realized that we could cover almost all of the different areas that NASA Ames works on. So NASA Ames works on lots of different types of projects. And then here's a sort of a zoom in on one section that explains this a bit more. So this is the tech tools section. An example is the object is the Astrobee, which is an AI-driven robot that's on the ISS. One of the scientists that works with it is Dr. Megan MacArthur, which you can see the graphic here. And then the activity itself was built to get people to understand how the Astrobee functions. When the Astrobee was a redesign of an older robot, which is modular, so it actually comes apart and those pieces can be swapped out really easily, as well as its software is modular and can be sent wirelessly and swapped out very easily remotely. So we kind of developed this activity where kids can build the Astrobee from these modular blocks and then test it on this custom air hockey table and test it on how it floats around in space, because they needed to develop this robot so it could function in zero gravity. So this is just one example of how our design system was developed from scratch and how our approach became cost efficient. And I welcome everybody to come up to NASA Ames. I'll give you a tour. So next I want to jump into Universe Unveiled. So Universe Unveiled was really a part of a bigger project which was called internally the Deck Refresh Project. It was sort of the second main project I was hired to help to work on. You see Chabot on the left-hand corner here. That's when it opened in 2000. The observatory area has that green patch. Later, when Adam Tobin became the director in 2017, he worked with the Exploratorium to develop the new observation deck. And I helped on that project too while I was at Exploratorium. This was really around this idea of all different types of observation. That's what the exhibitry was built around. And in very much Exploratorium fashion, we really kept it open-ended so people can really be a part of the learning and driven by their own personal curiosities. So one of the downsides of this exhibit that the Exploratorium developed, that we all developed, is we assumed that there would be a large amount of facilitators on that deck explaining what was going on with the exhibitry. And that just wasn't the case. And that's part of that sustainability aspect of a mid-sized museum is how do you maintain exhibits when your budgets go up and down throughout the year, staffing changes, volunteers change. Those were things that we needed to consider moving forward with this deck refresh project. At the same time, we were looking at this exhibitry, which is really great, and we still use a lot of it. There was also a lot of infrastructure needs that were needed in this project, and that was what we were headed towards. For the first year, I was working on how can we build exhibitry into the infrastructure project. So this bottom picture was just a quick AI sketch of how, because the subfloor in Rachel's observatory needs to be fully rebuilt. and we were discussing like creating some solar system graphics there, so you could actually have a teaching opportunity. So finding ways to like integrate learning into infrastructure builds. As things go, this project shifted very dramatically. The budget that we had was cut by almost 75%, and we're still looking at ways to, reinvigorate the space outside, how to get people drawn in, and spark that curiosity that we are really looking for to drive visitors when they came up to the observation deck. So I'm looking out at the observation deck, taking inventory on what's out there. My background is in astrophotography, and I really wanted to find a way to integrate astrophotography into the observation deck. Also realizing that we're an Instagram culture, and one of the cool things that Chabot does is we offer public viewings every Friday and Saturday night. And what I saw over and over again was people waiting. They've never looked through a telescope before. Many people haven't. They would wait, they'd come, they'd look through the telescope, and then you'd see that look on their face. They'd be a little bit puzzled. And I could tell, I was assuming that they had seen these images from Webb, and they'd seen these images from Hubble online, and they were drawn to it. But when they look visually through a telescope, they're like, that's not what I expected, right? And I would get that over and over again from folks when they have their first sort of experience with these telescopes. So, my thought was, hey, observation is that tool for how we understand ourselves in the universe. And we really ought to bring the communities that already exist in the Bay to Chabot and have them showcase their work, right? Have these astrophotographers, this world-class astrophotographers in your club, by the way. You guys, right? I see you, Imran and Francesco. Fantastic work. And I just think this was the idea that I kind of pieced together and pitched with the for the deck refresh project. And what came of it was this Universe Unveiled. Very short timeline for this project. And again, the budgets were cut very rapidly. So I think we had about 6 months to put this together. And I think I reached out to everyone maybe in December, and we were opening in April. So really a fast timeline. But here's the folks that were in the exhibition, and not your typical astrophotography exhibition, as it was outside. And this astrophotography exhibition is really about the educational outreach of the images themselves, right? And we were developing this we decided to develop this alongside the Space Telescope Science Institute. And it really became, the premise was, what can you see from Chabot's observation deck? So all of the photographs that are highlighted are from this northern hemisphere, could possibly be seen from the deck with the right equipment in the right time of year. And we developed these guides that would go along with the visitor as they move through the exhibit. And this guide was developed in partnership with STSCI. So very like astronomy 101. Most of our visitors are very young kids and families, many of them with no experience whatsoever with astronomy or space science. So just an introductory guide to what's in the night sky is what we were going for. And then if you want to dig deeper, you can with these QR codes. So there's more content online, and this content would lead to STSCI's website. So this was our new approach to the observation deck. And so here's a couple panels that you can see live along the rails outside. There's Brian Fulda, who it sounds like he's going to be speaking with you guys in a couple months, talking about his imagery. We looked at how the visitor moves through the space and how they can sort of learn about these different deep sky objects in context to each other, as well as learning what they are. So focusing in on what is a supernova remnant, and then how is that image of the little veil in context to the other larger objects in the Milky Way. The exhibition also touched on astrophotography itself and how it works. So we had a panel that was dedicated to the star removal process, as well as the coloring process that's used in astrophotography. And a little bit of the guide also covers that topic. So really giving people an understanding of, well, what does it mean to build an image like this? It's very different than just taking a snapshot with your cell phone. We also talked a lot about, the fact that amateurs are contributing in new and exciting ways to the actual science of astronomy. A good example is the O3 arc here that was discovered by amateurs. Brian Fulda and a few team members, they actually discovered this planetary nebula. We also talked about the difference between processing Hubble data and processing data from your camera. So a few examples of what's in the exhibition. Another exciting part of this deck refresh project was really introducing the community at Chabot to the public. So highlighting key volunteers. This corner is what we internally called Conrad's Corner. Conrad was a previous director and staff astronomer here at Chabot, and this is another area that we see being able to change over time at a location where we can highlight key individuals who have been a part of the Chabot and wider Bay Area astronomy community. And then another aspect of what we did is we reached out to the wider Bay Area community, to the astrophotography community, asked them to submit their own work and put it on display on various monitors throughout the center. So this is one corner where we have those photos playing, rotating on monitors throughout the day. We also have monitors in different parts of the center that showcase amateur astrophotography throughout the bay. And then during the opening, we had a panel. We had all the astrophotographers come up, talk about their work, talk with some scientists from STSCI, and take questions from the audience. So it was really a great time. And this is really a new approach for Chabot to sort of, one, reach out to the wider Bay Area community and at the amateur level and the enthusiast level, and invite them to come in and be a part of the Chabot community. And we're hoping that this is just the beginning of that. And I want to close briefly with my pitch on this. So the next project that I'm really excited about at Chabot is what I think in the advertising for it, we had a different name. This name is literally changing weekly at Chabot. Right now, it's the Community Orbit Gallery, but we're dedicating this area of Chabot to community groups. So I share this slide regularly at Chabot, this build community, and I just want to talk through it a little bit with you. It's been integral to my thinking when I work with other artists and community groups, and have been for almost 30 years now. We identify with the groups that we spend our time with, right? And that identity is like built into us. And it's essential that institutions like Chabot or galleries or other events that are being developed with community understand that, and the events that are put on allow individuals to come in and participate, and that reward that comes from being a part of that group gets people excited and gets them coming back to that group, right? So this is the sort of thinking that I'm proposing to folks, and I'm proposing to you guys tonight. San Jose Astronomical Society, you guys could come put on your own exhibition here, and we could display it at Chabot. So it's a little bit of a pitch to you. And if you're interested, reach out to me. We can talk more about it. Currently, we're working with Oakland Roots, the soccer team, and that's going to be one of the first exhibitions in this space that I think is opening in late July, early August. But our thinking here is that the cadence of rotation would be probably quarterly, so every 4 months, or maybe every 6 months we rotate this space. So that's really my presentation. I really don't want to go too deep into Universe Unveiled because I'd love for you to come up to Chabot and I can give you a personal tour, walk you through more of it. But really would love for you guys to think about the fact that Chabot is really trying to be that place for all things astronomy and in space science. And we want to have an open door policy for anybody who's interested as an enthusiast to come and be a part of that community. So thanks so much. And yeah, I'd love to answer any questions from anybody if you've got.
Thank you so much. Okay, this is the time for her folks to ask Mason questions if you have any.
No question, but a comment. My stepdaughter had her wedding at Chabot back in August of 2014. So the ceremony was actually in the planetarium, and then they opened up the entire exhibit area for the reception, including the telescopes. They had people there working on them so people could go up and check out the telescope. So it was quite a fun evening.
Yeah, it's a regular thing that happens there. EAS, the Astronomical Society, has really been the stewards of the telescopes there, and since their inception in the 30s, I want to say, really an older astronomy club. And actually, that's another thing that I should pitch to everybody is if you want to learn how to operate these telescopes, you don't need to be a member of EAS. You can come and they will train you and you can come and operate them. You can interact with the public on a day or on the nightly viewings and the weekends or on weddings when we open it up to the public.
Yeah, I think I recently saw a post from Chabot. There was some wedding last couple of weeks or something. I saw a post on, I think, Facebook or Instagram. So it was very, very nice to see that.
Yeah, it's a fun. That would be a great place to get married.
Mason, early on you mentioned that you were working on a new film, Become the Mountain. Could you tell us a little more about that? I'm curious.
Yeah, sure. This was a COVID project of my own. It was supposed to be a small film, and it has now expanded into a feature. My grandfather, so it's a personal story, and I'll give you a little bit longer than my elevator pitch, but essentially, my grandfather on my father's side disappeared in an airplane crash running military exercises in 1948, right after the war. And they never found his plane till the late 60s. During that time, it was in a very inaccessible spot in northern Vancouver, no roads. The only way to get there was it was about a 3-day hike through some really treacherous areas or get helicoptered in. One of the family members that also died. They had a brother who was on the same plane. There was 9 men that disappeared on the plane. One of the family members that after they found the plane, one of the family members really pushed the military to go in and find out like what happened to the plane and what happened to that evening. And that took about 20 years. In the 80s, finally someone made a connection with the Bush family in Texas, and they sent in SEAL Team 1 to figure out what happened. And the plane had basically been hidden under a glacier that entire time. So they picked up a few human remains, made a couple, did a full survey, brought the remains to Arlington Cemetery and buried them. I went to that ceremony when I was in the 7th grade, but they never really determined what had happened. In COVID, I stumbled across some old 8mm reels of my grandfather just weeks before he disappeared. And it was like a whole box that was in a closet. When COVID happened, I think we all did a real deep cleaning on our houses. So that's what came out of my deep cleaning. So I jumped back into this story and realized that all sorts of things had happened. And the big one was basically the glacier is no longer there. So I put together a team. We flew into the location. We found human remains, figured out what had happened, and still trying to piece it all together right now. But what started is I thought it was going to be a quick 5-minute film of reels of my my grandfather turned into now a feature length film. So yeah.
All right. So I was curious to ask actually Francesco or Imran or both, what was it like to be on the other end of that, exhibit? Since I don't think there's anybody else on the call who was in the exhibit, but if there is, of course, you could speak up too.
Yeah, I can go first. It was really a wonderful experience to meet with Mason in person also, and the rest of the staff over there. It was incredibly complicated and detailed exhibition, very nicely managed and very well planned. And of course, we enjoyed all the images that were at the display and the observation deck, and we were standing, next to images and looking at them and admiring them, and people, came to us and asked questions when they were looking at the images. And for example, if they are looking at one of my images, and I'll go there and say, hey, what do you think about this thing? And then that started the conversation, and it was people were very curious. Some people had little experience; they were asking a little bit more deeper questions, but many of the people were just, but hey, what are these red dots and what is this arc? And it was really great experience. And of course, sitting at the theater with the rest of the astrophotographers and talking about each and every image out there and taking questions from the hall, from the people, and I think it was fully packed. I was very delighted to see that. There were a lot of people, then asking interesting questions. I totally enjoyed that entire experience. So, and this is a great opportunity, Mason, to thank you again for putting it all together. Very well done.
Yeah, I'm so happy you could be a part of the exhibition. Like I said, it was such a short timeline. A lot of the designs and build decisions were built basically because we had about 6 months to put things together. And just an example is you don't typically see that printing process on an outdoor exhibition. And we really went that route because we had such a short timeline. There are other products that you would see displaying images outside that will last much longer. I don't know if everybody knows Bay Photo, but they print images on metal, and they have this newer product that it's supposed to hold up, I think, 5 years in direct sunlight without fading. So we're excited to see how that pans out. So a lot of learning went into piecing this thing together, and but really what made it work was the fantastic imageries that you guys submitted and that we were able to put together in the exhibition. So I just want to say thanks again for that.
And I second what Imran was saying. It was an honor, first of all. It was a really fun process to see the preparations and how things were starting to unfold. And finally, it was to me was a discovery of Chabot that I knew that it was there, but I had never visited before. And the most enjoyable thing was the opening, because I actually got to meet in person those people that maybe some of them I had read about, like Jared or Tara. But meeting with them, talking to them, and hearing these stories directly from their mouth, that was invaluable. So thank you very much, Mason.
Yeah, well, and I mean, being able to come here and talk tonight, I feel like that's what I mean when I said this is just the beginning, is that I'm hoping that this new approach really brings the community together. And I could see, I mean, we have been talking about trying to get the Advanced Imaging Conference held at Chabot in the future. That's a rumor, by the way, that I can just drop in this. But you know, the more you put these things out there, the more momentum that can be created. So that's my hope, is that Chabot can be that place for folks like yourself who are enthusiasts or specialists, or maybe have advanced degrees in things like astronomy or space science, or maybe robotics. You know, there's a lot of different organizations. I'm really interested in reaching out to dark sky preservation groups too, and having them come be a part of Chabot's community and doing an exhibition. So, and I'm really trying to open the doors to the wider community too for suggestions. So we've built a suggestion box basically, so that anyone could write in for exhibition ideas. So in my mind, it's Chabot is it's in that sweet spot of having fantastic, beautiful facilities, but we're not so big that we need to be closed off, you know. I think it happens to some institutions. They're fantastic institutions. The Smithsonian, it's a beautiful museum, right? But not anybody can just approach the Smithsonian and say, "Hey, I have an exhibit idea," you know. So that's what I'm hoping Chabot can find avenues like this future community gallery. I think is the first step of that, to opening us doors and letting groups who want to showcase their astrophotography is a good example, or showcase the history of their community group. So I'm hoping that's what comes of all of this.
So if I may ask a question, so what you have in mind for this community orbit, would you say it's more on the artistry side, more on the didactic side? How could an astronomy club like SJAA contribute, or will it be most effective?
Yeah, I mean, what's the most, I would say, if you guys are really interested in this as a club, the hard work is coming to us as a club, right? So who is really driving, you know, who's gonna be the point person on communication and that kind of thing. We would be open to displaying just about anything, especially from a group like SJAA, because you're so aligned with the mission of Chabot already. So the answer is very simply, it's mixed. It's whatever you'd like to bring to us. The real thing to think about is the limited capacity of Chabot. So I think I highlighted a little bit of that in this presentation, is that we're a small team, and we are only going to succeed with the help from the wider community to meet the goals, the ambitious goals that we're setting for ourselves. And there's lots of other exciting things happening in Chabot. I didn't touch on what's called the Oakland Space Academy. There's a large educational initiative there where we're providing workforce development for teenage and young adults out of high school. Excuse me. So lots of really exciting things going on in Chabot, and we're looking at new ways to getting that information out. We just hired a full-time marketing person, and we've just hired a new internal development person. So yeah, please reach out to me. I'd love to continue the discussion. Yeah. So I imagine more astrophotography, but I'm a little biased on that. I love astrophotography, right? So I could also see a history of SJAA. So you guys are one of the more active clubs in the Bay, from my experience. I've been to a few star parties, and yeah, so we're open to any suggestions, really.
Are there more questions? Anybody want to speak up? Well, I'll make one comment and hopefully get some more. It's interesting. There's a lot of outreach with telescopes, where you have the public or schools come by and people, bring their telescopes and kids can look through and ask questions. But I don't know how much face-to-face stuff happens with astrophotography. So it was interesting, as Imran discussed, to be standing there. And I mean, you get some of this online, but face to face, of course, is a different way to do it and an interesting way to do it every now and then. I am curious. Oh,
Yeah.
oh,
Go
sorry.
ahead.
Also, I mean, I went that weekend, and it was I really enjoyed it, and there were a lot of people there. Seemed great. I was curious about, is I assume that wasn't the typical weekend at Chabot, but how many, what kind of visitors, how many visitors do you get? Is it on a
Well,
week?
it's so funny. I, as the exhibit developer, the exhibits team is working to build the exhibitry, right? So it's sort of a platform from which the other layers of facilitation are built at Chabot. So we're building the built experience, right? And then on top of that, you've got public programming or events. Those are different teams that are sort of activating the space on top of it. And so, yeah, I worked really tirelessly for a few months to get this exhibition out. We had a great opening. We had some events around the opening. And it was coinciding with some other things that were happening that same weekend, which was the GE showcase. That's part of the Oakland Space Academy that I talked about. But the reality is there's almost some event or public programming going on almost every weekend. So I'm not there every weekend, but the exhibits, the public programs and the events team, they're there every weekend running something. So surprisingly, yes, that is more of a typical weekend as far as visitation goes. And then of course there's the Friday nights, the Friday viewings, the Friday and Saturday night viewings that happen. So I think what's exciting about this exhibition is that we were finding a way to bridge what happens during the day with also what happens in those evening viewings. So a lot of folks that come to the Science Center don't know that there's these viewings happening on the evenings, and vice versa. The viewings during the evenings, they don't know that there's a whole Science Center with public programming happening. So it's something we're still getting our heads wrapped around, is how to bridge those two so that people know that the other is happening at the same time. In your mention of astrophotography, I think I talked about this all the time, is like, as astrophotographers, we like to stand alone in the dark, right? There's not a lot of face to face. So, but being an artist where I've shown my own work in art galleries, I've worked with artists who show work in museums and art galleries. That's like the social aspect of it is so important and such another driving component to making images. And I do think astrophotography is more on the art side than it is science. So I think it's challenging, like being an astrophotographer, we're all working for an A-pod, right? Or something like that. That's sort of the pinnacle, right? Like, I don't think I've ever actually printed a decent photo of my images, because it's just so hard to figure that component out. Bay Photo is helpful with this, but I mean with my own personal small printer is what I'm discussing. So like finding an avenue like this community gallery where you can, a club like SJAA could work towards showcasing the work that they're doing. I'm hoping that that's something that we can advertise and get people excited about. And the more that we come together in person, the more we're going to stay in touch, I think. So.
Cool. All right. Anybody else?
one more, if I can. I don't want to steal too much time, but Mason, you said something that I found very interesting, that people that approach the telescope and put their eye at the eyepiece, sometimes they may be underwhelmed because the public is spoiled by all the pictures from Hubble and JWST. So you mentioned that your goal was with trying to bridge that gap and create a ledge that people can stand on with amateur astrophotography. Do you have a feeling that that was an effective approach? You get feedback from people. How do they see our photography? Because some people say, well, why spend time at taking pictures of the sky at all, given that there's Hubble, there's JWST, there's enormous telescopes in Chile. Why do you do that?
Yeah, I think, our visitors, like I said before, are primarily young people and families. I think the main feedback we've gotten is just they're flabbergasted by the photos. I mean, they look at them and they're like, wow, this is incredible. There's still that moment of like, is it real? Right? So that's what they get. I think that's the first response when they look at the photo. I think that guide really helps them sort of piece things together, and the key piece is having that facilitator or that volunteer that's there who is there to answer questions, and a lot of the telescope operators or the deck facilitators that are there during the day, that's where I get a lot of the feedback from, those folks who are volunteering. And those are the comments that I've got is like, hey, people are really excited about the images you have, and I kind of talk them through what it's all about, right? And when they learn that it's not, a government organization that made this image too, I think that's another level of excitement to people, that I definitely don't think that's in the public's mind. And that was a component that I hope this exhibition speaks to.
That is not a CGI. Mason, what I always, because I was there one February, and then of course I had my son with me, and then he has seen my images a lot, because he only had Photoshop from his school, and I didn't want to pay Photoshop, so I used his computer to do the Photoshop part from my images. One thing that was very interesting is that he looked at M42 Orion, and then he whispered to me, it does not look like that what you have, right? So the thing that came to my mind was that a really good experience could be that, hey, people look at in one February evening, people look at Orion and through the telescope, and then we have a small refractor on the corner, and then we basically say, you know what, let's make an image of Orion. You don't need more than 1 hour to image, right? 20 minutes each on RGB, and put them together in Pixel Sight, and then literally 15 minutes it will be ready. And then they can actually see that what they saw from telescope versus they saw from the actual astro image through a small refractor, and they can see much more details. I think that overall 1 hour to 1.5 hour of process could be a really great exercise, especially for high school kids. If they are curious.
Well, I'm just to plug another thing that I'm doing. We're going to be having what we're calling Space Week, the last week of July, and I'm going to be teaching an astrophotography class. Again, very intro, no Pix Insight, but I think you're on exactly right though, and I think electronically assisted astronomy is a big component to that. Jared, when he comes in and volunteers on the deck, he brings a kit that he has set up for that, so people can see the image build up over time. And
they'll do live stacking, and then keep them showing how it's developing.
Yeah, exactly. So, and of course, the level of detail that your guys' images present versus EAA is not the same, but I think it gives people an understanding of how the technology can work. Like electronics are building and layering that image, and you can start to see that that little fuzzy blob is that beautiful deep sky object.
Yeah.
So.
By the way, one other interesting thing I thought you did that hasn't been mentioned is you got two pros to, critique, more or less compliment, but, point out things in the amateur images, which was interesting. People who, for a living, work on Hubble images or JW, web images, looked at Francesco's image. That was sort of interesting. And Imran and
Yeah, I was really excited to be able to do that. And I think it's something that moving forward, we would have as a regular component to whatever's in the community gallery. So we have a number of different partners in different fields of astronomy or space science. And my hope is that whatever exhibition gets put into that gallery, we can bring in a pro or a for-profit company to sort of weigh in on what's happening. So an example would be a robotics club that builds robots, and then we may have a company like Joby Aviation or Astro Rockets come in and weigh in on what that club does and kind of compare and contrast how you do things at a professional level or how it's used by professional astronomers versus an amateur enthusiast who's has a deep love for that subject.
Yeah.
I've got to ask briefly, if I may. In the past, Chabot had a strong environmental program related to that climate lab. And has that kind of been lost, maybe because of funding?
Yeah, I think so. One of the big changes that came out of COVID and out of these new partnerships is realizing that Chabot, from an exhibit standpoint, was spreading itself a little thin. So we kind of the thought was to focus in on basically two content sets: it's astronomy and space science. So within those two focuses, there is astrobiology. There's other approaches to science, and we're partners with Planet Labs and a couple other companies that do climate science, make satellites for climate science. So we're hoping to showcase that. NASA Ames has one of the projects we may be putting into the visitor center for this next iteration is around Acero, which is firefighting drones. So that has a climate component to it. Yes, we don't have that as its own standalone. I know we used to have a garden at Chabot. We used to do quite a few variety of things. So right now, it's the thought is to keep those under sort of the umbrella of astronomy and space science.
All right. Anything else? All right. Well, let's call it a meeting. So please, everyone, unmute and give Mason a big round of applause. That was a great talk. Thank you. Well, I don't hear the unmuting, but I see the applause.
Yeah. Thank you so much, you guys. I really appreciate the opportunity.
All righty. Thank you so much. And
Thank you, Mason.
Thank you, Mason.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Hope to see you guys soon.
all right. Bye-bye.
Bye now.